Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Social Work Services Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Remote participants, please follow the Good Practice Guide, which includes muting mics and switching off your video when not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPad or iPhone. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply in that votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, either leave the Teams meeting for that period or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting so we can keep track on whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. When referring to reports, please reference the relevant page and paragraph for everyone to follow. And finally, please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. Members will note that it was the intention of Social Work to present their business case report for reimagining the residential care for children in Dumfries and Galloway, with further detail, information and analysis on the various options that have been previously agreed in this committee. Due to the complexity of this work, it has been respectfully requested that this was delayed until April to allow more time to conclude on the analysis and presentation. The progress of this work is going extremely well, and members may have had the opportunity to speak to Charles Rocks, Head of Children and Families Justice Services, at his most recent political groups on this visit. Does anyone have anything they wish to contribute or to go through Charles on that, please? Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Dorward, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. No, very much welcome. You want to get something right before you bring it to committee, and very much welcome Charles taking the opportunity to talk to various groups and to spokespeople for social work services as well. That was really good. Would there be any chance, perhaps, of looking at, or maybe back to front here, a seminar prior to, or before or after? I don't know. I'm not going to leave it in your hands, because it's such a massive issue for everybody concerned, not just Social Work Services Committee, and obviously we're the deciding people, but it might be useful to have a seminar outlining broadly where we're going with this suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorward. I appreciate that feedback and those comments, and I think it's certainly something we should consider, but obviously I would like to go through Stephen to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorward. I think a seminar would be really helpful. It's going to be it's not just an issue, it's a series of issues about the whole system, and we just happen to be focusing and looking through the lens of residential care at the moment, so we'll try and do that. What I am well aware of, though, is your calendars are extremely tight in terms of, from a governance perspective, trying to get a seminar in place, but I'll work with Claire and colleagues to try and get a time. And Charles, I would imagine that would be better pre-committee rather than post-committee. Yeah. If the committee's fine with that, and let's see if Claire can do the magic with the committee diary, that would be grand.
Thank you very much, Charles. Yes, we'll make sure that's noted. Thank you, Claire, and we'll get back to you, Councillor Dorward. Thank you. So item 1 is redundant apologies and approval of the minutes. Can you please provide, Claire, the redundant, including who's participating remotely, and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've currently got 19 members present. We've got 11 members on Teams, 8 in the hall, 1 member currently not present, being Councillor McFarlane, being advised of 1 apology, being Councillor Bell. The 11 members on Teams are Councillors Karen Carruthers, Councillor Dashbar, Davis, Harry, Ingalls, Jordan, Little, Mayo, Walters, Wood and Young. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I noticed that Councillor Little wishes to speak, but if it's okay, Councillor Little, I'll come back to you just when we've gone through the first few items before we commence the meeting, if that's okay. Thank you. So item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, unless that's yourself, Councillor Little?
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just to give Councillor McFarlane's apologies. That's the reason I wanted to speak.
Okay, that's really kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, Claire.
Yes, and I can see Councillor Bell has in fact managed to join the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So the minutes of the previous meeting of 3rd December 2024, the minute is for approving. Are members happy to approve the minutes? Thank you, everyone. Item 4, Social Work Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 24-25 for the period ending 31st December 2024, Quarter 3. This report provides members with an overview of performance against budget for social work services for the period ending 31st December 24, Quarter 3 for the current financial year. Janet Sutton is available to answer any questions. Thank you. Councillor Dorward, please.
Thank you, Chair. We've discussed the residential placements in the paper coming to April committee, and hopefully a seminar if we can fit it in, which I'm sure we can. It's more about Appendix 2 and 2.3 in terms of additional funding required for services. And I know this is predicated on sort of year on year looking at how much, and there's a an assumption, which I don't wholly agree with, that the numbers might go down in terms of residential placements year on year, because they've only gone up in the past few years, and up quite considerably. You know, so I think that would be great, but great for the children and young people more than the budget. But we're talking about the budget here, so I get that. I know that we were doing quite a lot of work on early intervention and prevention. I'd like to know where we are with that one, how that's working, and in terms of capacity of the social work team, how they are managing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorward. Stephen, please. Thank you.
I'll give an initial response, and then I'll bring Charles in, and also Rebecca from an adult perspective. I know this is specific in relation to the non-delegated budgets. So the projection about figures going down, numbers going down, etc. You're absolutely right that they've gone up quite significantly over the last few years. And we strongly believe, there are several factors for that which we've socialised in this environment in relation to the impact of the pandemic on human growth and behaviour, cost of living crisis, etc., which impacts fairly significantly on the most vulnerable and in a disproportionate manner. So we believe that is some of the reason as to why things have moved in the wrong direction for children and the families. We do believe, though, that as we increase our capacity with the mitigating funding that's come into place, and also we look at different ways to deliver residential, which will come forward, that we will see the numbers of both children who require residential care and the type of residential care, so more local, which makes things cheaper from a financial perspective, and more importantly than that, improves outcomes for children. So in that respect, that's why we've presented the information in the way that we have. Nothing's guaranteed and nothing's certain. And we've obviously got the ongoing budget monitoring processes, and if we're not achieving targets, we report them through the usual manners, including this committee. In relation to early intervention and prevention, many members of this committee will have been part of the previous council where we invested quite significantly using anti-poverty funding to get early intervention teams into social work. And we've had reports here in the past that showed the success of those teams working predominantly in the non-statutory interventions. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, the ability to go out and about into communities was significantly curtailed. And then, in terms of the response to the pandemic, those staff were drawn into more statutory interventions with more complex cases, and we haven't been able to get back to the point where we were doing that full early intervention in that manner. Those staff are still doing what we would class as preventative work, but it's much further up that triangle of need. In relation to capacity, I think it's best if I hand you over to the two managers who are directly responsible. So I'll go to Charles first, given that we're kind of in the children's space, and then Rebecca in terms of the capacity and pressures on our staff in adult services as well.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Councillor Dorward. Just probably add on from Stephen's points, we recognise that the work we're doing with the Children's Strategic Partnership around early intervention, which sits around our allocation of whole family, which sits at that front door for social work. However, the data and information, the themes that we've been evidencing over the last 18 months, 2 years, is an increase in that level of complexity. A number of challenges around children's impact of cost of living and poverty and the distress that's been presenting, and that has resulted in a number of different indicators that would demonstrate the overall challenges around managing that as a demand, probably reflected within the Dumfries and Galloway Child Protection Register, which has shown an increase significantly so over the last 18 months, 2 years. And I think the teams have been working tremendously well to try and support that need and address that. However, it continues to be a challenge, particularly around our capacity and time that we can provide to the children who are getting into that area of edges of care, in supporting some of these really complex plans to keep children in their community. And Stephen had previously highlighted the whole system aspect of that we need around Children's Strategic Partnership to support that and to work around the ambitions around the promise. In regards to the targets we've set, I think it's an area that we've provided a level of analysis and projection, looking at the children and young people we have around the transitions and moving on to positive destinations out with care, and that we've identified, near 50% of our out with placements are children who are over the age of 16, young people who will move on, and trying to then do that as best we can and trying to see the impact that we would have around the outcomes for our intensive support team, which I kind of have to highlight is still within its infancy of development. There's still a huge amount of work around the implementation of the practice models to support the teams, to provide them the best opportunity to enhance that wraparound scaffolding for us to kind of evidence that. So we have set these targets based on that analysis, and there is a level of optimism that we'll see that, but as I said, I've highlighted before, we're dealing probably with children's lives, the unpredictability of that in situations, and this is probably one of the greatest unpredictable areas of projection that we can have for us as in the council. Thanks.
Thanks, Gerard. Thanks, Councillor Dormant. I think that from an adult care perspective, it's a similar picture. We all know the complexities of the types of challenges that people are dealing with are growing. So historically, we would have had somebody coming into the service with a issue. We have people coming in now with multiple issues, layers of complexity, and obviously that takes a great deal of time. We've seen the detail round about setting the bar and the levels of work that people should have, and we far exceed that within adult care and children's services. So I think that it's really important to recognise the amount of pressure that staff groups are under, trying to do their best to do what they come into social work to do with these groups. Similar in the housing and homeless team, and the demand on services within that area, I think, is reflected from some of the challenges in the wider population, where we're seeing many more people coming through the homeless route, etc., and that brings with it, as we all know, its difficulties. We continue to try and work, when I say we in partnership with the Health and Social Care Partnership, to find ways of getting ahead of the trend, if you will. So the work around the vision and work around about social work, what we hope to achieve there is to find ways to get in earlier to people, because we all know that early intervention is the only way forward. There's absolutely no way that we're going to do anything if we can't do that. So I think that just to conclude that, I think that it is fair to say, and it would be disingenuous not to say, that it is tough. Capacity is a real challenge, and as the demographics demonstrate, it will continue to be a real challenge. So I think that capacity within social work needs to stay on all of our agendas, and needs to be something that we seek to try and support moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Charles, I'd like you to come back. Would you like to come back in? Stephen first. No?
I just come back.
Oh, Stephen first, thanks.
Sorry, both of us fighting over the microphone again. Just wanted to give a couple of little bits of information that might kind of give you a snapshot of how difficult it is. So for our adult social work staff at the front line. If we look at the recommended caseloads in the Setting the Bar report, which hasn't been formally accepted in terms of being an industry standard, but it's the best research that we have, our adult social work staff's caseloads locally are more than double what that report states they should be. And all of the work that our adult social work staff do is on a statutory basis. So they have to do an assessment under Section 12A of the Social Work Scotland Act 1968. Apologies for reference in the legislation, but that's important. And they only then hold onto a case if there's eligible needs in law. So all of the work that those staff do is on a statutory basis. The early intervention for adults has to come from different parts of the whole system of supporting communities. For our children and family staff, their caseloads are in excess of 3 times that recommendation. But the bulk of their work is in non-statutory intervention. So we currently have, as of Friday last week, it might have changed by today, 67 children who were identified as being at risk of harm, of abuse, and are on our child protection register. In excess of 300 children who have compulsory supervision orders. Yet we work with well over, is it 1,200, 2,200 children, Charles? Yeah. I sometimes get my statistics wrong, so I always go to Charles. So the vast majority of the children that we work with locally are on a non-statutory intervention basis. And I often think that's lost, particularly in children's social work, because people think about those who are at risk of abuse, or those who are in conflict with the law, or those who have significant well-being issues that require compulsion. But the vast majority of what we work with falls below that statutory standard. It's still in law, but it falls below that statutory intervention standard. So sorry, I just thought that would be helpful for elected members to understand some of the context. Our justice staff are quite fortunate. Their caseloads are only just over, but that's probably to do with the very unique way with which those services are funded, which is based on the actual work from the year before that comes through the court system. Sorry, Charles.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I picked up the point around caseloads, which I was going to highlight, because I think the question from Councillor Dorward is around capacity is an important one. We do need to continue to highlight and profile. We explored last time about the time and motion study, which highlighted that it was less than 1 day a week that we were actually spending directly with children and families. There is a scrutiny review that we are doing, a presentation on Friday to the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee members on recruitment and retention within children and families specifically. And further analysis around our information has highlighted that intermittently we have been operating between 65 and 70% capacity as a service due to vacancies and sickness. And that does put a huge level of pressure onto frontline staff that impacts around our ability to develop relationship-based practice with our children. And when we're dealing with the caseloads that we have through our commitment to offer the best support we can, we impact on the ability for our workers to develop those relationships. And I think we are really committed that children have a right to have a relationship with their social worker to achieve that change. And that's been incredibly challenged through capacity pressures. And we're hopeful through the scrutiny review that we will come out with some tangible actions and opportunities that we can then take forward and or further explore to try and support and mitigate that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charles. We very much welcome the report to the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee, and we'd like to commend, well, I would like to commend the teams and myself and my Vice Chair on their work ethic and commitment, because I know how hard everyone's working at the moment. So on to questions from other members. Councillor Slater's. Oh, well, can I let Councillor Slater in first, Councillor Durbin, because they've been waiting. Okay, come in then, please.
Appreciate that. We've got quite a light agenda this morning, so it should be okay. But thanks for that. I think it's almost not to make it too dramatic, but a perfect storm. And this is not to take away from the hard work that's being done by frontline staff and managers and admin staff and everybody to try and support people who are extremely, extremely vulnerable. There's no additional funding for Health and Social Care Partnership this year from in the budget. So you're doing more with less, which is a mantra that public sector workers have been using for a number of years now. And there's a challenge there, and I think capacity-wise in terms of workforce planning, we can do what we can do with audit risk and scrutiny locally, but there needs to be a bigger shout out here to Scottish Government in terms of workforce planning across the whole of Scotland in terms of social work, because we cannot continue to, we've been doing this for years locally and doing some really good work and growing our own, and you know, it makes minor differences, and that again isn't to you know, I'm not criticising the work that people have done, but we cannot get the numbers up here for lots of various reasons that we all know. I won't rehearse them. So is there something again about speaking to Scottish Government? I think the last committee we had, we said, you know, would Scottish Government recognise and adopt the outcomes of setting the bar and taking the wheel? Yep. I think we wrote to them, didn't we? Or we asked to write to them.
did,
Have we had a response yet?
Yes, I think I copied you all the response.
Right, okay, sorry,
Yes,
sorry,
thank
Chair.
you. It's okay.
Which was like, they're not doing it. They're not going to, at the moment, take up the recommendations, because we need to look at workforce planning, medium and long term. I know that you know that anyway, and I think what we are doing is laudable, but probably not enough. Thank you, Chair, for letting me back in.
That's all right. Thanks, Councillor Durwood. Stephen, please, thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Durwood, it's a very good point. To give you some comfort, there's a couple of fairly significant pieces of work being done at a national level at the moment. We have a social work education partnership, which is a partnership between various different organisations, including Social Work Scotland, which is our professional body, some of the universities who encourage, you know, social work students to come through, Scottish Government and other Scottish Social Service Council, etc., all part of that. And they are very aware that workforce through an education lens is really important. We're also due to move into a shadow year for a national social work partnership. It's not been fully agreed as yet, and I'm speaking very publicly and aware that this is live streaming. I'm part of the working group, but it's, you know, not all of the information is public, so I'm now backtracking in my mind and being very careful about what I'm about to say. But the priority for that particular group when it starts, and I won't say when and how just yet because it's not been finally agreed, will be workforce. It's recognised that we need national changes to assist all 32 local authority areas across Scotland, and workforce will be a priority. So the Scottish Government are one of the key partners within the new National Social Work Partnership. Some people still call it an agency, but we are trying to shift towards a partnership. And that's one of the areas that is still up for debate, if I'm being honest. So I'll probably stop there because I'm digging myself a really big hole publicly.
Thanks, Stephen. Try not to dig any more. Councillor Slater, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's on page 16, 4.4. There are currently 30 young people in resident placements at risk. Further people require placement between now and the end of the year. I just wonder, I think I've brought this up before, is regarding the council bringing this in more in-house and have premises either built, and in the long term, that would keep children within the area, near their parents probably, and the cost of that in time, it would give you more control of looking. You wouldn't have to look so much for placements, you'd have them in your own remit that way. Whether that's a viable proposition regarding costs, it's costs against the placements, against probably building a building over a longer period of time. But I think it's something that should be probably looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slater. I believe Charles is working on that, as you know, so I'll let him just explain. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. That's part of a reimagining residential care in Dumfries and Galley, part of the options that we're exploring. Probably what I have to caveat it with is that there is still a cost for us for children who we're caring for within our own resources. What we're trying to do is provide a sort of an analysis to kind of think about over a medium to long term what benefits would be both for children in terms of their outcomes in lives and also for the council in terms of achieving better value with the different options to explore, and that's what we're hoping to present in April's committee for the further discussion and analysis. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's clear enough. Is that okay, Councillor Slater?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Thank you. Councillor Jameson, please.
Yes, thank you. Some of the stuff I was going to bring up has already been mentioned, so I won't go through that. The funding that was agreed last year, there was 3 specialist groups to be set up. I believe one is complete and the other 2 are incomplete. My first question, and you've touched on it earlier on, is staff retention as well as bringing in new staff is clearly an issue. Folk are overworked, probably feel undervalued, under pressure to do a lot of work, sort of thing. So one of the things that I would ask, how do you manage the morale of the staff? Moving more into the 3 specialist groups, one of which was whole family support. What you've described just now is that because of the pressures of the more extreme cases, early intervention is difficult. My question is, and this is a well-trodden question by me, is how well are we working as one council? How well is education, social services, the NIGB, even the economy and resources to try and help young people and adults that are a pressure in a family can come from the children, it can come from the parents, and all things in between, mental health in particular. So I would like, and I know the one council policy is very much embedded now, but given your workload, the focus on the stuff that you have to do, how much has fallen through the cracks that might be picked up by more, I say this word carefully, how effective is our coordination and collaboration between all the services and volunteer services? Because it obviously takes time to do that, but the outcomes could be beneficial in the long term. First question is, how are we addressing the pressures on the health and well-being of your staff? How does that impact on our ability to have early intervention to prevent children and families getting into deeper trouble? I say this all predicated with the fact that I've got huge respect for the work you guys do and the people on the ground. I spoke to a social worker who actually approached me in my local cafe thinking I was my brother. And he said, your brother was a guidance teacher. And he said, he saved my life. I was going nowhere. I had problems. My dad had died, and he helped me through my hires. Went through university. I've got a job in social work, but I'm under terrible pressure because he cares. So nail it down to 2 questions. How are you supporting your staff, and how can we help social work through genuine, effective collaboration across the council?
Thank you very much. These are genuine points, Councillor Jameson. I can hear that coming across, and I know that work goes on behind the scenes, so I'll let Stephen elaborate. Thank you.
Yeah, so 2 really simple and straightforward questions to answer, Councillor Jameson. Health and wellbeing is the Directorate's management team's key priority for our staff. We are well aware of all of the pressures that are out there for them. I've already given some statistics in relation to how overworked they are. and being absolutely honest, some of my staff say to me they sometimes dread Social Work Services Committee because on one hand they hear how well they do and they get the honest praise from yourselves and also from the management team, but they're also reminded of how difficult things are, and that's what the press pick up and that's what they see, and it actually makes things harder for them. So I'm just going to say that in this public environment that, you know, the staff do a tremendous job, but we do have to do something to support them. So we've currently commissioned an internal wellbeing study which is going to be presented to our management team next week, and we will look at what the recommendations from the staff are and what we can do. But on a day-to-day basis, we try and be as visible as possible, which is tremendously difficult. We ensure that our staff do have, you know, support and supervision. We attempt to prioritise, you know, caseloads as much as we can, but the pressures are significant. Charles and Rebecca are constantly going around different offices, making themselves present, so that staff know that, you know, management do care and that we try and engage. And I have an open door policy and do similar visits, but not as frequently as other managers. We're also currently looking at staff-side support, and I'll explain what that means. So for our adult social work staff who are part of the Health and Social Care Partnership, they get access to psychological support through the NHS staff-side services. And we're currently looking at what that might look like for our children's workforce as well, in order to have some formal support around well-being, particularly for those who experience vicarious and real trauma in the workplace. So we're looking at a potential spend to save initiative in that field, and colleagues are looking at that. So there's various things that we do. We've obviously got all of our HR policies that are there to assist staff. We have occupational health, counselling, etc. And we also will do bespoke significant support for staff who need that at any one time. So that's kind of a little round robin, and I'll let Charles and Rebecca, in fact Rebecca will come and fest here, I can see her finger kind of attract my attention. In relation to the next points though, around working together, we'll come back to that as a separate issue because there's some really important bits around well-being, if that's okay. So Rebecca, then Charles. Sorry.
Thanks, Stephen. I think I'd probably just add to that obviously staff have access, particularly in health and social care partnership, to various mechanisms. So there's mindfulness classes, there's lower level supports that are available, and I know that Stephen has tried his best to do that for people within social work management, for example. I think probably what I'd want to say is that for me, I am absolutely, it says it, passionate about compassionate leadership. It has to run through the veins of everybody, because if you're not available emotionally, if you don't, I think there's a quote, listen with fascination. If you're not able to do that with people, then that is where it falls down. And I think, and I can speak for Charles as well on this, that the managers, the kind of frontline managers who manage the people that go out and do the real hard work, they are amazing, and they spend time and they're available, and that cannot be underestimated. So on top of everything else, Stephen, that you've articulated there in terms of what supports are available, I think that I want to give particular mention to those managers who understand the pressures, understand that the people that they're actually supervising probably are experiencing some of the challenges that our client groups are experiencing, and I think it's important to know that, and it's important to have those types of people. People come into social work because they care, and our staff groups care about our staff groups, and that goes all the way up to the top. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jamieson. I think Rebecca and Stephen have covered many points, not to go back over, but I still remember the point of reading the Independent Care Review in 2020, that the line which had a big impact on me, which was, how do we hold the hands of those who hold the hands of the children? And that really challenged me in terms of my sense of responsibility and leadership to our frontline workforce, which includes our frontline managers, who are holding at times that sense of moral panic around plans that they see this visible distress within our communities in its rawest form. And I think our social workers and support workers do an incredible job within that, but I think it's quite sad that from their perspective, at the end of the week, they probably focus on the things that they have not been able to achieve rather than the great successes and outcomes they have achieved for children. And for us as a social work service and as a social work profession, both locally and nationally, we struggle to profile ourselves in terms of the great work we do and the outcomes we achieve for children through different areas of work, and through adult services, through unpaid work, and keeping people safe. And it's really challenging. So the messaging at times that our frontline staff see, despite the positive messages through this committee, at times is through that lens of media and social media, which at times can be incredibly distressing for them, because they go above and beyond, they do incredibly complex work, their values at times is phenomenal through the most challenging circumstances, and they are a credit to the communities that they're there to serve, and we are incredibly proud of them. In terms of the nuances of support, we're always reflecting in this, what can we do more to provide that support, particularly around the complex issue around the vicarious trauma that our workers are holding. And we've learned a lot as a service and a profession over the last 3-4 years, because it's not something that's instantaneously been mentioned and referred to. And I think we're always willing to link in the staff where possible to hear and listen. And sometimes we don't necessarily have the answer for that, but there's that level of trust and being authentic around that, which I think is incredibly important. Thanks.
So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the importance that we hold well-being for our staff and some of the things that we do. And we will have missed tens and tens of smaller, subtler initiatives and things that we do. But your next question around how well are we, I'll paraphrase and I might get this wrong, Councillor Jimerson, so apologies. How well are we working together across the whole system to support children and their families? And is there anything that you as a committee can do to support us is what I interpret as the question. Would that be fair? Thank you. So what I'll say is we try our absolute best to work as one system for children and their families. And as many members will be aware, we do have a national policy framework called Getting It Right for Every Child, which is about every child from the moment they are born having a professional aligned to them to look after their needs as they grow and develop. And for the vast majority of children, hopefully they will never need any additional support beyond a single service response, so nothing beyond your GP, etc. But for those that do, that framework, that policy framework, and the legislation that sits alongside it, attempts to make sure that where we need a synergy, a connection between sometimes services within a directorate or within a single organisation such as the council or the health service can meet the needs, that they do it collaboratively. And when it needs more than one organisation, that child doesn't really see an interruption to that. Being absolutely honest, does that work as well as it should locally? The short answer is no, but it's not for the lack of trying. What we're seeing, we've spoke specifically today about the immense pressure on social work services and the impact that has on people. But I can think of two of our main partners in relation to children's well-being are education and the whole of the health system, but particularly mental health and neurodiversity. And the pressures that our colleagues in schools are experiencing in relation to the number of children with additional support needs, whether that be through really challenging behaviour because of trauma and life experiences, whether that's because of a neurodiversity or whether that's because of another type of disability. Those numbers are increasing, and the complexity that our colleagues are experiencing in classes and in other areas of schools it's really just risen so sharply. I think there was a 50% increase in additional support needs children coming into primary one this year. I think that was the right statistic. From a health perspective, there's an overwhelming barrage of referrals into neurodiverse services, for example, and waiting lists are well in excess of a year for some people. So the whole system's under tremendous pressure. And when systems are under pressure, you tend to concentrate on what you view as your core function. So for social work, that core function is protection. For education, it's pastoral care, and that's not a clearly defined thing necessarily. And in health, that they are trying to look at who is the person that's most at risk on our current waiting list. So Councillor Darwood mentioned a perfect or imperfect storm earlier, and we've got that across the whole system in terms of the pressure that's around. So I would say that because of that tremendous pressure across the whole system, we're not doing as well as we need to do in that collaborative space, but it's not for the lack of trying. Now, we are addressing this through the Children's Services Partnership in terms of the whole children population. We're addressing it through corporate parenting in terms of those who are looked after. And we're also trying to pull together initiatives collaboratively that will make things better as we move forward. What can you do as elected members? One, you acknowledge that positions you have. You've also been very forthcoming in terms of resourcing things as you can, but also, your lobbying position in terms of your work at COSLA and other environments through your political groups, etc., is something that we can do. So that's quite a global response as opposed to a specific one, but I think that whole context is really important to understand why some of those challenges exist. And that's not a criticism of social work, that's not a criticism of education, and it's not a criticism of health, but it's a descriptor of where all public services currently find themselves, in my opinion. Charles, I don't know if there's anything you want to add in relation to the children's element.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, and I suppose it's, you know, to provide reassurance around the role of the executive group within Children's Strategic Partnership. I suppose the questions we're asking is how well we are doing in this space and what evidence we've got of impact. We know there's been a huge amount of work around our public protection agenda that's provided real reassurances, both for the key services but for committee around the protection agenda. What we need to demonstrate is the evidence that we've got around impact, particularly for our children who are looked after at home, and the evidence and outcomes we're achieving within that, and is the whole system working. And I think there's a real intention of how we can pivot some of our quality assurance work that will begin to look at these themes and areas that we can have better evidence and intelligence on. But the strategic partnerships there, it's just incredibly pressured through all parts of the system, as Stephen highlights, in terms of priorities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody. You know, looking after people and face-to-face contact is extremely challenging, and we must highly commend anybody in the caring profession, because the world is extremely challenging at the moment, as we know. Did you want to come back in, Councillor Jameson? I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I do. I appreciate all your comments, and I know I've had plenty of conversations with you before, but I say this with the greatest respect, we aren't doing as well as we can or should. You mentioned pastoral care. The pressures on a guidance teacher, there's something like 200 and odd children under guidance. They've got children there that need real connection with families. It's not just about children, it's a pressure on the parents as well. So I would really encourage you to look at education CAMS yourselves, and you've quite rightly challenged me on issues like some teachers are now doing social work. They're not qualified to do social work, but in effect, they're having to do some of that, and getting a child into school from a family that's under real pressure, it's really difficult, and teachers are going to the doors to pick children up, knowing that there's trouble. So my request is that we really look closely at this to see, take a step out and look in, and are your meetings are effective? Are we actually making a difference to the family, to the children, and the outcomes? So I know you're doing a lot, but I just think we could tighten it up a little.
If I can just respond briefly to that. Don't disagree with anything you've said. The Children's Services Executive Group are making those connections, and we are doing extremely well for the vast majority of the most vulnerable children. When I was saying that we don't get it quite right, that's about that whole process for everybody. So to give assurance that, you know, the collective partnership do excellent work for the vast majority of vulnerable children and young people. And what I didn't say in relation to that, and you're absolutely right, parental mental health is a significant issue as well, so we're working in those spaces. We've also got our youth work staff who are in schools as well, who are supporting in terms of, you know, mental health support, and the collaboration between all of those services is really quite good. So apologies if in giving you the context of the significant pressures across the whole of the piece, I give the impression that we're not getting it right for children. We absolutely are, but we're not getting it right for 100% of children, and I probably could never give you that guarantee, regardless of how well things are going.
Thanks, Stephen. Councillor Hill, would you like to come in? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that point, I think the pastoral care has been mentioned in education by myself before, and that's a completely different scenario to social work. Social work deal with different things, so I think that needs to be raised at education, not at social work. I know the two do intertwine, but I kind of feel that that's more the children's services for the education side, and social work have that much pressure dealing with some of the pastoral work, because that's a different job, adds to the pressure, even though they do work collegiatively, together. So thanks.
Right, Councillor Jameson, last comment, if that's okay.
Very quickly,
We do need to thank you.
No, I don't disagree with that. Some schools have got pastoral care, some schools have got guidance. They've no training. None of these teachers have got any training in these things, and yet they're dealing with mental health, all sorts of issues. I don't disagree with you, but we need to put more focus on education, on guidance teaching. I've already took that to the education, but if you ask the guidance teacher, they need support from CAMS, they need support from social work, so it's not entirely separate in my opinion. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Points taken. at the moment there's been a lot of work going on with the Public Protection Committee that I sit on, and so do all the members here in the department. So there's actually been quite a lot going on behind the scene. Can someone just let one of the councillors know that his camera's on? Thanks. So I think we need to take concise of that. There's a lot of work going on as well at the moment with sexual health that we've brought up at Area Committee, Councillor Jameson, so something's actually being done about that, and we should get a report in the next few weeks. So, but thank you for your points. Councillor Scobie, please.
Thank you, Chair. The figures that you want me to speak up? No, the figures that Stephen referred to and Charles gave greater explanation to, some 1,200 children at risk, both in the statutory and the non-statutory responsibilities. That really is quite frightening to hear, and maybe it should have been contained in the report. I'll come to that, but it always frightens me that, you know, and I've asked this question in the past, about, you know, a chief social worker at one time, how frightened he was, or concerned that he woke up some morning and something untoward had happened to a child. That we're hearing too often in the national papers of a child, not in this area but in other areas, and that must be a concern for us. And it comes back to the verbal reports that we've heard today from the officers in terms of how much pressure social workers are under, and Charles referred to capacity, and I think it was at the setting the bar we heard that there was 82 or something, the figure of that ilk, that we are understaffed in. Not all social workers, but in social work department. And in 4.11 it does refer to measures and the projected underspending of staff, and we got your assurance as the chief social worker that that's not a deliberate to find savings, because that 742,000 figure would be massively increased if those vacancies were not there. So in that respect, what I would hope that we get to this committee is a report that tells us just how effective our recruiting efforts are to recruit, broken down area by area, because it tends to be that in the west of the region we lose out the most. You know, and it's not about people don't want to come to the west, because we've just heard from the NHS how successful they've been in recruiting on doctors and nurses, and we should see the same coming through in social workers. So it's taken area by area, but a separate report recognising the pressures, and this will manifest itself in burnout, possibly, but we can start to see just what the movement of staff is, and that we get that report. So we'd ask that that be included in a separate report, just how effective we're being at recruiting, what the effect that is having on each of the areas in terms of being able to deliver, also to look at these frightening figures, that we don't wake up some morning and find something untoward has happened to a child, and then we become that focus of attention. So I would like to see that report, Chair, and I would ask for that.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. It's interesting you mentioned that. I've got a nurse in my ward at the moment who cannot get housing in Dumfries at the moment. So I think that we know there's a housing emergency being declared, and the council housing teams are working really hard to sort that problem, which is certainly one of the areas of concern that I have as a councillor, but I'm sure you're all on the same boat with that one. But I'll let Stephen answer with regards to recruitment for social work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Scobie. We do actually have a workforce report coming to a future committee that will look at some of the issues that you've highlighted. So I would respectfully request that we include the information you've asked for in that report, as opposed to creating additional work for officers who are currently overstretched. But we will look at that. Thank you.
I think that's really helpful, Stephen, and I'm sure that will appease members. Thank you, Councillor Scobie, for that question. And Councillor Slater, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Stephen, and listen to the meeting this morning, and people under pressure and all the hard work you do, it appears to be a lot of that to do with, obviously, funding. If you had more funding, we'd obviously take some of the pressure off and get more children looked after, because obviously talking about it and doing it, but one of the big issues here is funding at the end of the day for a very well, what you call it, organisation you're running here to help vulnerable people. But so I would like to think maybe at the budget, I'd like to think, I don't know if you agree with it, maybe more funding should maybe come to this very vulnerable area. It would probably help into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I think the discussion this morning is very similar to discussions we've had previously. And the factors that impact on the success of our work and the more positive outcomes for vulnerable people that we work with are multifaceted. If this council was minded to give me an extra £2 or £3 million for more social workers, I wouldn't be able to spend that money. The social workers don't exist. So we can't look at the issues faced in our society, and social work deal with the more acute end of society and issues. We can't look at that purely through a fiscal perspective. And if I ask for more money now to try and do more of the same of what we currently do, it wouldn't be helpful, because that money would have to come from another part of the council, which is actually potentially helping to support the whole system to improve our society's well-being in its entirety. But what we absolutely have to do, and what we are doing with our colleagues, is looking at what are the priorities of our Children's Services Executive Group, as an example. The paper that Charles is going to bring forward in relation to reimagining residential, and that's actually touching on part of it, but the whole system. The work we're doing in adult social work around what's our vision to change things for the future, because our demographic is such that we would require more and more and more money and more people. So a lot of the things that we do to help people are people focused, and the population isn't going to be growing in that way. So right now, I wouldn't be making any ask or any bid for additional money over and above to pay for the services we currently give, because myself and the rest of the council and our other partners need to have a really, really deep look at what are the changes that we need. So social work education is an example. That's national partners that have to be involved in that. If we're looking at, fair pay, which we haven't mentioned today, we've seen a significant increase. Well, no, we haven't. We've seen an increase in lower paid staff getting up to a minimum level. There's all sorts of multifaceted things that need to come into play. So it's not as simple as saying, can we get more financial resource? That actually wouldn't help us right now, if I'm being honest. We have to look at what's that longer term planning, what's that systematic and systems changes that we need. And once we know what's likely to help, we then need to look at, okay, what would a spend to save initiative be? Because we can't stop doing what we're doing overnight. So it's quite a complex set of circumstances and environment that we're operating in.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen.
I
Are
agree
you
with
wanting to
Steve.
come back in, Councillor Slater? Just one last point. Thank you.
Yes, well, what you were saying, to look at the future, that's where I was really coming from as well, as funding for future, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Claire would like to make a statement from the Governance Department.
Thank you, Chair. There's been mention of Councillor Scobie of a request for a report on recruitment issues. I just wanted to mention, it's also already been highlighted this morning, but there is an agreed scrutiny review to tying in with social work services recruitment and retention of staff. It was agreed at the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee back in September, so that review's in progress now, and we'll report back to that committee and thereafter our full council. So there's possibly some of the issues that you mentioned will get picked up there too. Thank you.
That's really helpful, Claire. I think that provides us with some additional reassurance. So we'll now go on to the recommendations. Members are asked to 2.1, note the ongoing pressures and demands that are currently impacting social work services, which are estimated to result in a 742k net overspend, excluding homelessness, at the end of the financial year, as detailed in Appendix 1. 2.2, note that it is anticipated that additional corporate budget pressures funding of 704k will be agreed by the Enabling and Customer Services Committee on the 11th of February, which was yesterday, to address the pressures being experienced within homelessness 24-25, increasing up to 998k per annum from 25-26, as detailed in paragraphs 4.7 and 4.8. And 2.3, Note updates on the planned investment and mitigation measures approved as part of the 24-25 agreed budget to address the budgetary pressures and increased demand for children's residential placements and family placements, including fostering allowances, as detailed in Appendix 2. Thank you, members, for your contributions. We now go on to item 5, commissioning of housing support services for women and children who are subject to domestic abuse or coercive control. This report provides an overview to members of the process currently ongoing for the recommissioning of services for women and children who are subject to domestic abuse and or coercive control. The commissioning process is being undertaken in line with the Council's procurement standing orders. Rebecca and Heather are here to talk to us about the report and ask any questions. Do members have anything they wish to add, please? Oh, also, there's an error I'd like to alert you to on page 30. 4.2, the second point, lot 2 accommodation with support should say west and not east. I'm sorry for that error that we just picked up through Councillor Hill this morning. Thank you. Councillor Dorward, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. Really interesting. I suppose the issue of violence against women and girls is top of the agenda for most public sector areas, and this gives me the opportunity to ask about capacity as well, if that's reasonable. So I understand it's primarily about procurement, which is not an issue in terms of what you're proposing, but in terms of capacity or demand and capacity and immediacy of service provision, are we providing enough in terms of that so that we can respond with a degree of immediacy to women and girls who are subject to abuse, domestic abuse and or coercive control and or rape? Are we responding quickly enough? Do the services we have and we're procuring do that job? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dunn. I think that it's difficult for me to say whether, because there'll be a greater number of people that are unknown to us. I think that the services that go in to protect vulnerable people, including women and children, etc., don't just sit across this particular agency. We had a report at PPC where the Priest Women's Aid came along and talked to us and detailed that obviously the task that they have is growing, so it is difficult to say with any genuineness whether actually we seem to be identifying people where we are providing a level of support, so some of that will be in telephone conversations as opposed to face, but I think it's at this moment in time they do offer assurances that they are getting to those most in need. So those women who are at the edge of something that is going to impact on their welfare and well-being, for example. So we could get more data, and I can do that and bring that back if that's appropriate, because I wouldn't want to say too much about the information that I personally don't hold, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Stephen, please.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Rebecca and Councillor Dorward. I'd like to bring your attention to a piece of work that's just about to be commissioned by the Public Protection Partnership. So on Tuesday of this week, I think the Public Protection Committee met, and we had an excellent presentation from a number of groups who came as a collective around Women's Aid and other services that support women and girls who've been subject to violence and domestic abuse, etc. And it was a really, really sobering presentation in terms of the pressures that the services are experiencing for all sorts of different reasons. And in addition to that, we're well aware that services such as Assist, who support the victims of domestic abuse, rape, etc., through the court system, are providing some excellent services locally. But also they're overwhelmed in relation to the backlogs in the courts, the length of time it's taking, and the specific support services locally are really struggling to offer that immediate support because they all have waiting lists, and the ongoing support that's required because of the volume of abuse that goes on towards women and girls. So what the Public Protection Committee agreed to do through its chair and vice chairs is to have a look at this in more depth through the violence against women and girls kind of pillar of that committee, to do a deeper dive into funding models, data, etc. So that's something that that committee is already going to commission, and I think we could feed specific and detailed information through Social Work Committee, because it does impact on the work that we do as well. So I suppose that's me kind of potentially heading off a plea for a specific report when another committee and same staff, if we're being honest, are going to be looking at that. But it was extremely sobering, that presentation this week. And it was a very, very difficult listen in terms of the significant increases in violence against women and girls across the piece. Now, we're seeing it in our child protection statistics in terms of children living in households of domestic violence, police statistics in terms of increased numbers of rapes, sexual assaults, etc., across the whole of the piece. And it really was horrific to hear that and to see how services are struggling. So in terms of capacity, as I've alluded to already, the whole system is struggling. But this area of the most acute levels of violence and harm are also experiencing that. So Public Protection Committee is on it in terms of what we do, and we do have that. That's one of the three pillars of what we look at. So we can report back through this committee through the work that they're doing.
Yes, I think as Chair I'd be quite happy with that. And Councillor Durwood, it was a really hard-hitting meeting on Tuesday, but the multiple cross units all working together are really positive. And the White Ribbon campaign, which of course we're all very, very pleased to support. Well, pleased is probably not the right word, but we wish to support that campaign, which does raise a level of awareness for people, and obviously coercive control is a huge part of that, and hopefully women are now coming forward to get the help that they need in these situations because of that campaign and other campaigns, I'd like to think, albeit extremely upsetting. So the more we as councillors can make people aware of these campaigns, it's really important we continue to do that. And Public Protection Awareness Week through PPC have worked really, really hard with the social work teams here across all the organisations that work together. So I think that's positive news, I'd like to think, albeit very distressing. Would you like to come back in? Thanks, Councillor Durwood.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Stephen, for that overview, and thanks, Chair, for the assurance that work is being done. I do appreciate that. I think, though, what you've said is that it's the whole systems approach. We've already discussed that ad nauseam, so I won't go back down the road again. But what's concerning here, and it's not about staff, because everybody's doing the best they can in the circumstances they're working in. The courts, the justice sector's doing the best they can, and nobody's doing anything wrong. It's just what's concerning here is the fact that we're encouraging women to report these issues, from so coercive control to sexual assault to rape, and they could be waiting. And I get you can't give me specific times. I understand that. Again, it's not a criticism of anybody. They could be, most at need. What is most at need? It's an individual thing, isn't it? So we say most at need. We might have characterised that by whatever, but it's about the individual and how they perceive that. And I think that's the thing that, whilst not being detrimental to anybody who's in the system, it's the capacity issue again that we're raising, and that's the challenging thing. And I would really welcome that report, or part of that report that PPC are doing, coming back to this. I think it's essential, Chair, that we see that, because I think as elected members we need to know that information and be able to do something, hopefully, proactive about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your concern and interest in that, Councillor Durwood. Thank you for raising it. So I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, we do. Councillor Jameson.
Just very quickly, and it touches on what Councillor Dorwood mentioned there, and it's just an administration thing. On 4.10, page 31, it talks about funding for each area will be proportionate by percentage of head of population. That's quite a very crude way of doing it. Is there flexibility if the need is greater in different areas? Probably all the funding goes, but if there was extra pressure in certain areas, then it might be worth having that little bit of flexibility within the system.
Thanks, Councillor Jameson. Heather, are you able to answer that? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. The reason we've kind of went that route is because currently there's a bit of a disparity with the funding levels across the region. So to try and even up the funding a bit and to get funding where it is needed, we've taken that kind of decision to go down that route, but there's always capacity to look at where the demand is within that model.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. And lastly, Councillor Slater, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's on page 30, outreach housing support. Is this like the local housing associations, or are they actually independent contractors or smaller entities probably bidding for this work?
Thanks, Councillor Slater. Heather, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Housing support is a regulated service that's defined within the homeless legislation. So the providers are normally social enterprises or charities who provide the service on our behalf. So there could be a variety of bidders for the outreach service.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slater. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the contributions. So we can now go to the recommendation. Members are asked to 2.1, note the work undertaken to date on the recommissioning of housing support services for women and children who are subject to domestic abuse, coercive control, etc. And 2.2, note the tender process and timescale for the commissioning of outreach support services being undertaken in line with the Council's procurement standing orders as set out in paragraphs 4.3 to 4.11. So item number 6, PPC minutes 29th of October 2024. These are for noting. And finally, item 7, any other business. I have no other business, and I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and participation. Get the words right. Participation today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.